Welcome to another episode of the MINDSi with Mike Lowry. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. I have another good one for you today. I have a guest by the name of William, and what we're going to do is talk about trauma, how to identify it, how and when it shows up, and why. Stay tuned. Let's see. Well, what's up, man? How we doing? Is everything all right with you and your end?
Pretty good on my side.
Pretty good
Have
on your side?
regular ups and downs as usual, but
For
things are
sure.
headed in the right direction for sure.
Well, that's good. That's a good start. Well, tell the people a little bit about you and what you do.
So, name is William Totten. I'm a financial advisor. Most of my career has been with wealth management or investment strategies. Now it's more on the debt settlement side.
Okay.
So, a bit of a transition. Still dealing with numbers, still helping people with their overall bigger picture when it comes to their financial goals. So, that's what I do as far as career wise. I'm a dad of three, originally from the East Coast, live in Southern California now.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I think you and I have been friends now. So we might be pushing 8 or 9 years now, I think. It's been
It's
a
been a
while.
minute.
It's been a
Yeah.
minute, man. Yes, sir. But I really wanted to get into it and kind of pick your brain and talk about some things that, I've probably been dealing with. I think now pushing into 40, I've really started to kind of like process some of the things that I've kind of dealt with early on in life. And I find myself like seeing them kind of come back around again and kind of trying to wonder what it is and why, and why things are kind of happening the way it is. And I kind of find that a lot of it could just be trauma, trauma in terms of things that may have happened in my childhood that may not be, comparably detrimental as maybe somebody else, but enough to kind of hold on to, enough to kind of like, cause you to like make not make the best decisions in relationships or friendships or maybe even at work. Um, is there a time that you could think of in your life that may have been, 2 years ago, or maybe in your childhood that maybe showed up in your 39 years of life and it's like maybe causing some conflict for you? Mm.
Yeah, it's shown up time and time again. I think insecurities that I have within based on the needs or the way I sought love as a kid,
Yeah.
that showed up in relationships. So when I was younger, I would always get praised like playing football, being aggressive, getting hits, touchdowns. Um, I always was good with saving money. So
Mhm.
like there's times in between paydays, my dad need money, it'd come like 10, get you 15. So I always knew or I learned having money and being more aggressive. Those were the two kind of ways I seen love show up for me.
Right.
So as I aged and became an adult, and I'm like, I'm doing a lot on my own. So I'm anticipating if I'm doing what I need to do to get the money and I'm aggressive with work and my ambitions and my goals,
Mhm.
I should be loved.
Right. Yeah.
That ain't the way it works though. So
Right.
I feel like what I've learned over the years, specifically probably the last three, um, is how you have different needs and how trauma when you go through trauma, you have different coping mechanisms to make yourself feel better.
For sure.
And those coping mechanisms are based on certain needs that you have.
Hmm.
And as you get older, the needs will stay the same. The coping mechanisms will change. Those
Okay.
evolve. But when you're not addressing the underlying needs, then I would say that's where you're going to see the same patterns show up because you're looking for a different coping mechanism. So I'm going to stop doing this thinking I'm growing and I'm going to start doing
Hmm.
this, but it's not addressing the underlying problem.
Right. Yeah.
So I definitely think that just insecurities when it comes to thinking that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing based on how I've witnessed this growing up. And then as an adult, you're like, oh, I thought y'all was going to give me my flowers now. I
Hmm.
did things, I set these goals. I've tried to distinguish myself from being like the others. But if you don't get that, then that's the problem too, because you're looking for external validation.
Right.
Other thing. So some of those needs was not, I didn't need to seek that externally. I needed to find and take the time to sort through that within me to where I know I'm good. I know where I'm at, who I am, what I bring to the table, and I don't necessarily need someone to tell me that, to give me that sense of validation.
Right. So what happened though, like in your life to for you to say, oh, the light bulb went off in terms of like, okay, when I was younger, I thought this is what love is. And then now as I got older, I realized that that level of validation is kind of different for me in terms of how I comprehend it now. Was there something that happened that transpired for you to be like, okay, this really isn't love? You know what I mean?
I would say maybe the awareness that I've been in a number of relationships,
Hmm.
um, whether that's romantically or a select number of friendships that I've developed and cultivated over the years.
Okay.
Um, when things don't go the way that I'd want them to do, whether that's with friendships like you and I type of thing, or
Hmm.
in a romantic relationship, if things are not working out, I'm going from one person, this or this
Yeah.
conversation with this friend, this conversation with that friend. Um, but I'm the underlying issue.
Hmm.
It's not them. It's me. And I see that every relationship, you may have different things come up, but some of those core things are still the same and like
For
how
sure.
you're presenting that. So
Yeah.
if I'm with someone that needs me to be a little bit more loving or attentive, I can do that, but I'm gonna do that the way that I realize that this is the way I would want to be loved.
Right.
So I think that when you take the time to see what your needs are, which are, I would say needs, not so much flaws, but you need to figure out the proper way to address those particular needs. But to
For
answer the
sure.
question specifically, it's just when you go through a number of years, you go from quality relationship after quality relationship.
Hmm.
Um, and you have different reasons for why these people are no longer in your lives or in your life, but you have to sit down and be like, all right, well, how do I process what happened here?
Hmm.
There's a lot of times there's so many times when I reflect, I was in an emotional state based on the conversation that we were having. Whereas if I was not in that emotional state or an alternative one, then the way the conversation and the information it would have been presented very differently.
For sure. Yeah.
So there's that, and that part is one of my favorite quotes is like when you take a second or two in the space between like making the decision, like having a thought and making the decision, you have that space to kind of process what you want to do or what would be the right action. So just
Hmm.
taking a breather. When you're able to do that, which that takes practice for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think that that allows you to see what the bigger picture is and if how to address it that way. But I
Right.
do think that most of the time in conversations too, and this has come up for me a number of times when it comes to trauma, would be you're not, how would I say that? I think that when you go through things with people and you take that time and space to kind of sort through it, you'll realize that some of the things that you want in life or what you thought, the vision is not going with reality. And
Right.
that puts you in a frustrating place.
Hmm.
But you can't blame the other person because you really didn't have your mission or your plan that thought out. So then you have to
Right.
take accountability again. And I think that that's the starting place with
Hmm.
when it comes to like addressing specifically trauma, but in my case, as I'm referring to this particular topic, relationships. I think that when you take the time to see, like, this is what I want my life to be, this is what I want these interactions to be, this is how I want to show up, and you know that, and you have these ways that you want to hold yourself accountable, you start to see less and less issues come up
Right.
because you're putting yourself in a, you're holding yourself accountable. And when you do that, you're also putting yourself in better environments, which
Hmm.
is also key with cultivating a better quality of life and peace of mind.
Right. And something you said that's extremely important is that most of the time, oftentimes, a lot of us don't really identify us as being the problem. if you will. And a lot of times it's based on just trauma and things that unresolved issues that we've dealt with in our childhood, relationships. And we wonder why we are going from relationship to relationship or even job to job or even friendship to friendship is because we're still dealing with unresolved trauma. And what I've realized is that a lot of the trauma that I may have dealt with in my life, I didn't necessarily remember specifically what it was until like something continued to show up in everything I was doing. And then I was just like, okay, let me unpack that. And then as I started to unpack that, I was able to find out what it was. Because a lot of times you don't really remember, but you remember how it made you feel. And then so when that thing occurs multiple times and how it makes you feel, you start at some point, you got to be like, you know what, let me figure out what that is. Let me find out what that is because it's not working the way I'm moving now. Friendships, relationships aren't like holding strong as I would like them to, only because of something that I haven't resolved internally. Do you find yourself like dealing with something like internally that just kind of feel like it has you on a hold or a grip that you just trying to let go of or unpack and address within yourself?
My two biggest, let's say, trauma related issues would be the fear of not being good enough and
Hmm.
abandonment issues.
Then the abandonment. Okay. Yeah.
So every, not every, but we talk about like 90% of the things that I see show up when it's not, when it doesn't go the right way and there's
Yeah.
more trials and tribulations. Where I'm showing up, I felt I was in a space where I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm good enough for this particular person. I don't know
Mhm.
if I'm doing the things the right way. Because you're also looking for that feedback, especially when you're
Right.
communicating with people. It's like you don't just say it and then it just is what it is. You want the message to be received the way it's intended, and you're looking to get that sense of validation or confirmation that this is time well spent, right? I'm doing the right things based on what you're asking for. So there's a lot of that fear of not being good enough. And then that ties into, oh, well, if I don't do things this way, then there could be a job loss. There could be a
Right.
relationship loss. So then that's
Mhm.
when, and that was, I never experienced job loss until, a year and a half ago. So that was a totally different, unique, and
Yeah.
uncomfortable situation. And it felt the same way though. It was
Hmm.
like, I gave you 8.5 years. I
Yeah.
moved across country. I took a pay cut. I took a downgrade in a position just to work my way
Hmm.
up,
Hmm.
and then still be let go.
Yeah. This what you said right there is extremely important that I think a lot of people miss is that the action itself can be two separately different things, but the way it feels can be the same. Like for example, you could be going through a job loss, I could be going through a breakup, and we still feel the same way about those two traumatic events. And then a lot of times people will like, well, you didn't go through this, but I went through something that made me feel the same way you feel. So maybe we can have a conversation about it to see what you did to get better, from that situation. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Yeah.
like with that validation thing for you and feeling like you're good, you're not good enough and that being a thing, from your childhood, your teenage years or what have you, was there a feeling that you would do things and like you were overlooked or nobody gave you that validation, or was it just like you just always were searching for something that didn't exist, essentially. And then now in your older lives, you realize it like, maybe it was never there to begin with. Now I just have to, figure this out myself.
Work related, yes.
Okay.
There's plenty of times where I've achieved goals, and then it's based on like certain aspects of pay or compensation is based on like manager discretion or something
Hmm.
like that. And I'm like, seriously?
Right.
Because the numbers, the goal, like I did what I needed to do for that. But now you're saying, oh, well, you could have helped out a little bit more here or a little bit more there.
Right.
And I get it. I get the sentiment of what that particular person or those
Hmm.
particular managers were saying. In relationships, the same way, because there's that me showing up thinking that I'm loving you the way you want to be loved, but sometimes you're not even understanding how you need to be loved because of the trauma that you've been through. And
Right.
as I work with people through that, and they've done the same with me, we can see these things show up. Be like, oh,
Hmm.
we were misaligned here. Because you could speak, 3 months later, a year later, and just have a conversation like, oh, yeah, I remember that. And I would have handled this differently. or I would have
Right.
handled that differently, but we were in different emotional states and then had different expectations given that particular moment as well. Um, so definitely work related where I feel like that has shown up. Um, I think internally, the not good enough sometimes has a tendency to do with my own personal goals and
Mhm.
the high expectations that I have of myself,
Yeah.
um, and then getting down on myself because I didn't do it.
So is that high expectation and getting down on yourself, is that like a distraction from something else? Like sometimes like people get extremely busy to avoid something. Like they have these high goals. Once I get to 100, I'm gonna go to 150. Once I get 150 is 200. It's like it never ends. But is that really something you're chasing for success, or are you chasing to avoid something else?
So for maybe 15, 20 years now, I've always broken down my goals from a health standpoint, financial, family, and relationship.
Hmm.
So I don't take how I'm measured financially versus how I'm doing in a relationship. If I'm
Right.
not doing a relationship, that's where I have to focus the energy or financially. I can't compensate like, oh, my relationship's not good, so I'm gonna put a ton of work, a
Right.
ton of effort into work. I don't do that. Um, but I will say like if it's like a relationship, then if things are not going the way that I want it to go, then yes, I will distract myself with other things that give me what I'm looking for. So it may not be that I need another relationship, but
Mhm.
instead of me trying to sort through this with you, I'm gonna go hang out with my friends in Miami.
Right.
I'm gonna take myself away from the situation and try to come back with in a different headspace.
You take a
So,
tan to South Beach.
but that's how I do. Like I like to be able to move, travel, and makes me happy. So that's one of those things where maybe over time, if somebody was psychoanalyzing this, they'd be like, "You are distracting yourself," and I'm just using this as a term to justify it.
Right.
But I do know that through history, for me, if you look at my track record, I like to travel, I like to move. So
For sure.
that's something that gives me peace of mind and happiness, and that I would say would be a distraction if I'm going through something that I'm not going to be able to or don't want to deal with at that particular point in time.
Right. I got you. That makes perfect sense. I want to ask you this question. It's kind of like it may come off as a cliche question, but I think that it's good to answer because I don't think that people really know or how to identify. But what if someone asked you what is trauma, what would you say?
An adverse life event.
An adverse life event. I like that. I like that. I looked it up the definition and I had to see what Google said, and it said a deeply distressing or disturbing experience or physical injury. And I think that, some people look at trauma as that like they were either verbally abused or physically abused. And like there's so many different forms of trauma. So I just don't want people to think of it as just that one form. You know what I mean? It's just something that you could have went without for so many years and realized that when you got older, it's like, oh, I really needed that. And I don't know what it is, man. Like I've been reading stuff. It's something about the year going into 40. It's just that like your psyche, the way you see the world, the way you look at things is just different. It's almost like you've had time to like really process, your life and what's transpired and what's gone and really identify with some of the traumas and really do something about it. What can you
Right.
say that you've been doing to kind of, combat some of those traumas as they're unpacking and unfolding as you going into your 40th year?
So I think that from a timing perspective, I look at it like, well, you had the first 18 years of your life where you were highly influenced by what your parents dictated for
For
the
sure.
most part.
Mhm.
By the time you hit 40, you've had 20 years to do what
For
you
your
want
own
to do.
dictate.
Yes. So, and then when you try to see, like, well, what were your plans? What were your
Mhm.
goals? And how are you measuring up to that? Um, there's a lot of you have to self-reflect because if you're still not where you want to go, you can't keep blaming everybody.
Right.
Like this is only you, man.
Yeah.
So I think that reading a lot more, my podcast that I like Jordan Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
Like he gives it to you straight. And then a variety, I like Andrew Huberman.
Mm-hmm.
Because I like more of the science behind what's taking place. That's why when you ask me what is trauma, I'm like, an adverse, experience, because when you start using words like deep or something like that, you're using more descriptive words where now it's like somebody has to be able to, it's kind of like you can add judgment to that. Well, was
Mm-hmm.
that really deep? And now
Right.
you're comparing life experiences and perspective. So adverse is just, that's something different. It's not what you anticipated. And generally, if it's not what you anticipated, you're not anticipating something negative. So you wanted
Right.
something and you went a different route. However, the world may see that it impacted you.
Right.
So that's what really matters. Um, but I think that in doing the research, definitely I do more meditation now,
Mm-hmm.
in a way to try to reflect. One of the biggest, my favorite thing that I've done that's been helpful is doing video journals. So
Mm-hmm.
I do where on my iPad, I'll record a video for 10 minutes and then I'll play it back.
I remember you telling me about that. You
It's
know.
the most, it's to me, it's very therapeutic because I don't have to sit up there and write it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at myself. So
Yeah.
then when I go back and watch a video from 2 months ago, I'm like, yo, you didn't even shape up before the video? Like,
Right.
what was
Right.
going on during that day? Or like, how was your body language? So when you have to look at you
Mm-hmm.
as time goes on, I think that that's insightful because as we wake up every day, we're just in a current state, right? And our current state is going to move based on the different experiences that we have. But when you can reflect and look at yourself and be like,
Yeah.
oh, this is what my thought process were. This is what I looked like
Mm-hmm.
5 years ago. This is how
Yeah.
my hair was. This is like
Right.
you just start to, and then you kind of put, when you meditate on that, you're like, all right, well, what was going on in life during that period? What changes did I make that got me from there here?
Right.
Or what are some of the same things that I feel like were going on back then that are still showing up for me here?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? And then just taking the time to sit with that and being able to process it.
Yeah.
So when you asked me the question about if I use other things as a distraction,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think at times that can come up, but the more times you do that, then you're procrastinating on really getting to your desired result, and then you're just doing yourself a injustice.
Right. Yeah. It's funny you say that about, how you look in the at yourself when you kind of essentially talking to yourself. It's like journaling for, if you will. I know you and I were supposed to meet up a different day. I think it was like at 9 o'clock or something. And I was like, let's reschedule. I wanted to reschedule it because I needed to get a shape up, to your point. But with that with that being said, when I first started this YouTube channel, it was so hard for me to just hear myself back. And it was a sense of fear. And I think that fear stood from like things that has maybe transpired in my past that like I feel like I've always been given a gift, stuff that's passed down from my dad. And like sometimes the closest people have the hard time seeing you grow and change, right, into a better person or a better individual. And maybe you may have insight that would seem foreign to them. So I would always essentially be kind of afraid to kind of like do that because people wouldn't be receptive to it. And so to the point of like now it's been 20 years since, I've been 18. I've had time to like just be like, it ain't for you then if you're not receptive to it. You know what I mean? There's somebody out here that is receptive to it and just being okay with like, okay, if it don't work, it don't work. I'll start over and I'll try again. But my younger days, I was afraid to do that. It was just like so foreign to me. I wouldn't even start because I was so afraid. Now I'm just like, I don't know. I'm gonna still put it out there, and it turns out to be one of the best videos type of thing because it's just like you just find your authentic self, and that's just really overcoming the fear and the trauma to the point you're making about just being validated, feeling validated, you know. But yeah.
Because I think if you grew up in a creative, supportive environment, like to what you're stating, where you were always put in like talent shows and
Mhm.
or like creative spaces, and then you had the support of your family to be like, hey, do this or try this, or friends and peers. But if you were always encouraged maybe even to fail in being creative, then that
Mhm.
takes the fear. Because like I'm supposed to do this. Like I
Yeah,
know I'm not going to get it right the first time.
right,
But when you are in environments where maybe you're picked on when you're younger, or you're criticized and
Mhm.
things of that nature, you're more so critiqued in a negative light as opposed to being motivated and uplifted. I think as you go through that year, as time goes on, the more experiences, that's like repetition, what they say, repetition and emotion creates like your current state. Like that's
Right,
what neuroplasticity equals. So when you keep going through things where you are being judged, and yeah, that naturally, you know, then you have to work through that, right? That's the
right.
trauma.
Yeah,
So
that's
it
trauma.
seems like you're doing that.
Is it? Yeah. And when I first started too, it was funny because I had like I wouldn't even do it by myself. I would have people on with me, and that was essentially a lot of people don't know is me hiding behind them, and I would feel comfortable because it's not directed solely on me, and then I've just watched myself grow. And the biggest thing, the voices that I hear is just do it. And then like I would walk into a situation, I would get a little nervous about it, and I would hear do it, and I just do it. And it's just like, getting through. And then now, like I said, like when you getting older and you hitting that 40, you start to process stuff a little different. You start to see stuff a little different and start to realize that like, okay, that's why all this has transpired. That's why all this has happened. And I can say, man, back in May, like something like really happened. And I just like locked in with reading. So I was reading the Bible even more, praying more. And then the stuff that I was like finding myself connecting to was showing up to me. And that's just being more in tune with myself. And I mean, I hate it took this time, but I realized that like you got to get developed. You got to get through this process. You don't snap your fingers and be healed tomorrow. You just have to, go through the process and stay the course and keep moving forward, you know?
I agree with that.
Yes, sir. I got one last question for you. How is your mental health? Oh, we got to think that one through a little bit.
Today, good. That's
Yeah.
part of the reason why, I'm here being able to speak because I wanted to speak from a positive and a good place.
Yeah.
I think if we had this conversation 3 weeks ago,
Mhm.
a month ago, it would have been a little bit more different.
Right.
It would have been different. My mental state at that particular point in time was more of anger and frustration.
Hmm.
And to a certain extent, disappointment too, because at that place, I was looking at things like, I'm doing everything that I needed to do or that I've been striving to do, but there was still some sense of like emptiness.
Right.
So I learned, like I had went to New York, and then like that was me giving back to myself because that
Hmm.
felt like that's like home. So there's
Yeah.
a different type of energy that I feel being there. That's not going to be everybody's experience, you know?
Right. Mhm.
So doing that allowed me to kind of center myself, ground myself in the sense of like, all right, maybe you need to refine what you are trying to do.
Yeah.
Be a little bit more specific because you say you want to make X amount of money, you did it.
Mhm.
Now, what you want to make more? But what did
Right.
X amount of money get you?
Yeah.
Oh, it gave you these experiences. You like those experiences. When you did those experiences, what did you take from that? Was it the
Hmm.
people? Was it where we went? So it took time to process that, but I wasn't in the mental space there was like a few different things happening at once where
Hmm.
I'm like, yo, can I have a break?
Yeah.
And if it got to the point where it's like I can't get the break from the world, and I already ain't giving it to myself.
Hmm.
So, but that's what it was when I went to New York. That was the break for me, and then I was like, okay, you know where you're at, you know what you can do. You see how this shows up time and time again. All of the goals that even high level, you still get there. It's just not when you want or how you want per se, but whatever you put your mind to, you can do. So make sure at this particular point in time, I'm watching my space, like my environment. That to me is the biggest thing. I don't want to converse with people. I don't want to be on social media that much. Well, not converse with people, but don't want to be
I
around the
see.
wrong people.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and don't really care about social media to an extent. Um, it's fun to see people and what they're doing and stuff like that, but then not everybody's really like living the life that they promote. So it's nice to see. It's entertaining. So I use it for what it is.
Yeah.
But I say that because when it comes to like circling back to my trauma, so looking at the fear of not being good enough, the fear of abandonment, those two biggest fears are the fears that I have within me.
Hmm.
And because I sought out that in other people, I was looking for them to fulfill something that I needed to fulfill in me.
Right.
And that's what I've been working on more so recently.
Yeah. That's important. Expecting other people to fulfill something in you that you need to fulfill in yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, that's real. Like my mental health, man, I think it's probably the best that it's been in my 39 years, to be honest. There's a lot of uncertainty, but I have clarity. And I think what's interesting about that is that as long as I have clarity, then I have an open mind to receive what's next and where to go. Due to that uncertainty, because I'm not allowing so much to be bottled up inside anymore. I'm not like I don't play these movies in my head anymore from a plot, the conclusion. I used to do that all the time. And I just found myself it just allow myself to be clear of all that space so I can find direction. I can find movement. I can understand what's the next, even in my uncertainty. You know what I mean? And I think that's just really doing the work, man. This year is the first time I've been in therapy. This year is the first time that I've really just logged into who I am, and I just got so much clarity even through my uncertainty. You know what I mean?
Therapy works. I
Yeah.
did that as part of that starting to change 3 years ago. And I think, so I said podcast. One other like practice when I just listen to them is like Buddhist monks and
Hmm.
their way of being and like just being like
Hmm.
conceptually like it makes sense. But I'm like, I could
Yeah.
just sit here, just but I'm
Meditate.
like, if you can get to that point, there is a lot of like transparency that comes with that space
Hmm.
because you're able to filter through a lot of the distractions, a lot of the toxicity that you're exposed to on a day-to-day basis and kind of find that peace. So that's
Right.
again kind of circling back to where I'm at in life. Mentally, I'm in a good place because I was able to find my peace. And there's times where, like I mentioned 3, 4 weeks ago, that's but a brief stint that I've learned. Before I'd be mad for a minute, like I'd hold grudges, and then it's
Yeah.
just show up in other areas of life. Now
Mhm.
it's like, all right, I'm hurt, and I know I'm hurt because I'm mad. And the only
Yeah.
time I'm mad is because I'm trying to defend myself to protect myself.
Right.
So I realized, okay, I'm hurt. That's why I'm acting out. That's why I'm showing up is in the form of anger. Let me give myself some space, process it, and
Mhm.
then, if it's something that needs to be circled back to, like with another individual, you do that. But generally speaking, you need to circle back to yourself and give yourself that grace. Be like, you did it, you worked through it in maybe not the
Mhm.
right way, or you're doing better type of thing. But
Yeah.
learning to give yourself grace and recognition too is important because I feel like a lot of us, I'm tough on myself, and I feel like other people are too, but it's important to give grace without like permission to keep doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. Grace is, I tell people all the time, it's like you got to give yourself grace. You can't sit there and beat yourself up. It's done. So now we have to process on how to move forward through whatever that mistake was. What can we do now to not make the same mistake again versus sitting in it, dwelling in it, complaining in it, and like, oh my God, I did this. Well, okay, be human, get through that little emotional state. But now let's climb out of it and get back to moving forward. So we got a few more minutes left. What is something that you want to give to the people that you feel like that can help them with whatever trauma they may be dealing with to help them move forward in their life?
I would say be your biggest fan.
Hmm.
Um, Learn what your needs are. um, Seek help, being able to talk through things with somebody like a therapist or whatnot, life coach. I think that all that is beneficial. But I think that developing a plan of what you want your life to look like in every facet and be very detailed in what that looks like. And then that allows you, from what I've seen, is my brain will start to pick up on all the things that I'm supposed to be focusing on, even subconsciously, like, oh, I saw that. That's part
Yeah,
of what you're trying to get to. So when you write things down, when you continuously, try to work through those things or put those images up in front of you, your brain will naturally seek the direction that you're trying to go in. But if you don't have a clear vision, that allows you to get sidetracked and make those mistakes.
yeah,
So be clear with your vision, seek help if needed, and then for sure, growth, reading books, podcasts. It's not
yeah,
like you have to reinvent the wheel. So the knowledge is out there. It's just being able to tap into whatever source of energy you need to make to give yourself the energy and the permission and that motivation to make the change.
for sure. I
That
want to
makes
leave this.
some of that.
Yeah, I want to leave this with the people really quick. I listen to this podcast. I won't name the podcast, and I generally agree with probably 90% of what the guy says. But there was a thing that he said about when it comes to men and therapy, they don't need to go to therapy. They just need to go to the gym. And I totally disagree. I think the gym is definitely something that we can utilize, through our mental health, but some people really need professional help. Some people really need situations or a confidant or somebody they can like talk to, what have you. Because you got to think about it. There are people that aren't physically able to go to the gym. So what do they do for their mental health? They still have to find ways and opportunities to grow mentally as well. So as much as I agree with the fact that the gym helps, there's much more needed because some people are dealing with real trauma. Like some people have lost, a loved one that, took care of them or what have you, and now they're not here anymore. The gym is not going to solve that problem. You know what I mean? You really need to really get the help necessary to kind of help you move forward. And even though that trauma existed, you still can live a fulfilled life. Yeah.
And therapists will ask you questions in a different way to make
Mhm.
you think. And that's the biggest benefit. They'll frame things to you in a way where you're like, oh, I never saw it like that. And that's the light bulb.
Exactly. Man, I appreciate you. The time is ticking down. We'll talk offline for sure. Appreciate you, my brother. Yes,
Thank you
sir.
for having me.
Yes, sir. Good stuff, man. This collection is more than just merch. It's a reminder that mental health matters, a reminder that your perspective is important. Each piece was designed to spread awareness, promote self care, and start conversations. By wearing MINDSi, you are showing support for mental wellness and open mindedness regarding perspective. Join us in promoting a more compassionate environment. In quote, together we are stronger. MINDSi. Well, that concludes another episode of the Mind's Eye with Mike Lowry. As always, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, as far as the hoodies, link is in bio. Don't forget to get your merch at mindsiml.com. Again, that's mindsiml.com. I really do appreciate it. Till next time, peace.